the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. It is Tuesday, August 10th in the year 2021. And no matter if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast or if you're watching us on YouTube or WKYC.com, I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes a part of your day. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at JStevens07. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter as well at Locked On Buckeye. Lineup for today, we're going to talk about and highlight some NFL draft prospects on the defensive side of the ball. We've hit offensive line and a few other players on the offense, but today it's all about the defensive linemen. We're going to hit Tyreke Smith. We're going to hit Zach Harrison, hit Haskell Garrett with my guy Ryan Roberts from RiseTheLetterInDraft.com. That's RiseInDraft.com. Follow Ryan on Twitter at RiseInDraft, at RiseTheLetterInDraft on Twitter. Phenomenal follow. He does do a great job of relaying what he sees from the film and how it translates to the NFL draft. He's only one of two guys that I've had on this podcast that are NFL draft analysts. The other is Alex Gilstrap, does a podcast with Ryan. They do a phenomenal job. Highly encourage you to check both of them out on the podcast and on the Twitter as well, at Alex Gilstrap on Twitter, and the NFL Draft Prospect Podcast. If you're looking for a draft prospect podcast to listen to, I'm going to back away. Bring in Mr. Ryan Roberts as him and I discuss three defensive line prospects: Haskell Garrett, Tyreke Smith, and Zach Harrison. And joining us now here on Locked On Buckeyes, it is one of my favorite NFL draft analysts out there, Ryan Roberts of RiseInDraft.com. Formerly, I know he did some stuff with Coast to Coast and some stuff with NFL Draft Bible, but he has a new venture, a new journey. We're going to talk about that because I'm very excited for Ryan, not just to be back here, but for this new journey, new website that he has out as well. Ryan, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Jay. I'm good, man. I appreciate you as always for having me back on. I would like to say, though, I am definitely the favorite draft analyst. I just want to put that out there real quick.
Yes, we did have Alex Gilstrap on previously, had a little friendly back and forth on Twitter, but Ryan is that guy. Ryan, can you please let us know and fill us in on RiseInDraft.com, kind of why you went down this road and what fans can look at when they go to the website?
Yeah. So kind of the way that it happened was I was at NFL Draft Bible, like you mentioned. I was the director of scouting there for a little bit. Kind of ended a little abruptly. I had to kind of make a personal decision to leave there, and I wasn't ready to make the decision, but I was kind of forced upon me. So I kind of went into a little I don't want to say tailspin, because I luckily did land with Coast to Coast Scouting and expand the box score, like you said, but it wasn't something that I was entirely comfortable with. I had some scouting reports going to one side. I had some feature articles going to the other. And honestly, I got a little burnt out, not due to the amount of work that I was putting in, but just because I felt like my work was very disjointed. Like I didn't feel like I was putting out the best quality work, in the sense of like, I wanted everything to be together and I want things to be coherent and understandable and not having to direct to multiple sites. And one day, a friend of mine was, we messaged back and forth, and he just said, like, if nobody's going to do it, we have to be the ones, right? So, and nobody is going to do it if we're not the ones. So, it happened very quickly. We got the, RiseInDraft.com, which has a really awesome database, which I think is probably one of the coolest features. We have, not only broken down into conferences, but position groups. We have verified heights, weights, 40-yard dash times, high schools, hometowns, birthdays, a little synopsis on players, and they all link back right to the site. They have the scouting reports that are hyperlinked right into the draft database. You click, and it kind of just takes you to different parts of the website where we have scouting reports and featured articles and podcasts and all this type of stuff. And we really wanted to sell this as most NFL draft sites branch out. Like, you'll get some college football articles, you get some NFL articles, and it's all good stuff, and I don't, it's not anything against those sites that do that, but we wanted to keep this NFL draft. We wanted to keep this, like, we're not going to put a bunch of ads in your face. We're not going to put anything behind a paywall. This is just straight up NFL draft content. And I hope that people, I have heard good reviews on it so far, and I hope that everyone does check out riseanddraft.com, because I think if anything, you'll get a lot of information that's for a large part is not readily available to the market. So I hope everyone does enjoy the new venture that I have going on.
I've always been curious and never asked you this question. Where did the name Rise and Draft come from?
I don't know, Jay. Honestly, I
It's your Twitter handle.
I know. But so when I first got on Twitter a few years ago, I actually my first Twitter handle was actually MadStork44. Don't ask me why that was a thing either, but
okay.
It was just like someone was like, you're an NFL draft guy. Like, you need kind of a better Twitter handle. You need something. So, like, everyone does like Robert's Draft or Robert's NFL or something like that. So I just want to do something a little different. Like, honestly, this is something where, like, I'm very passionate about it. So it's like I wake up and I research things, or I watch film, or I write reports. So I'm like, hey, Rise and Draft. There we are. We wake up and we get right to it. So I guess it kind of stuck. People seem to like it now. When I first did it, I was just kind of like, just trying to find a new identity, but it's turned into a website. So I guess it could be worse things right now.
It could be. Are there any exciting things that are coming up that you can like tease here on the show?
Yeah. So I guess I forgot to mention is, like, I put together what I think is a great group of individuals, from guys like Corey Kinnan and Devin Jackson and Ben Glassmeyer. Some of the guys, we're talking about the draft Twitter side of Twitter. Like, those are the dudes that I really respect. So, Devin is going to have his feature pieces. I'm going to have Corey probably do some contextualized quarterback stuff. I'm going to have Ben working on with scouting reports. So I feel like everybody's really going to find their niche heading into draft season. And I know that I've already talked to, some colleges as far as like getting the ability for them to be, to be there for press availability and all that type of stuff. And just kind of get a really in-depth look into the games for recap pieces. So I guess to answer your question, I really just wanted to create a platform that allowed other people that I respect to not be I don't want it to sound like it's like, oh, they're a part of my draft team. Like, I run this draft team, because I don't. All it is this is a platform for individuals to be as creative as they want. I'm not making them they don't do my my scouting template. They don't do my grading scale. I left everything alone. Do what you do, and this is a place that we'll build together, type of thing.
That's amazing. I checked out the website numerous times. It's a site that I would recommend to anybody if they want the draft coverage that Ryan, Alex, Devin, and those others that are part of that team provide. Speaking of draft coverage and what you guys provide, there is a guy, former five-star defensive, five-star recruit coming out of high school, Zach Harrison. Buckeye fans have been wondering when he's going to put it all together. Now, there is the upside, people believe. There is the potential, we think is still there, that Buckeye fans are hoping that they'll see this year. But when it comes to the NFL draft, what you do in college is one thing, but sometimes those things don't translate to the NFL. When you're watching film on Zach Harrison, defensive end at Ohio State, what kind of things do you see? Do you not like when translating to the NFL draft?
Well, I just had Zach in a first-round mock draft that I put out today at the site. I will say, what do I like about him? I mean, a lot of times when we're talking about defensive ends, pass rushers, edge players, the guys that are, we've seen guys in the past, obviously, the Chase Youngs and the Myles Garrett. There's things called unteachables, which I could teach a guy how to be better with his hands. I can teach a guy how to come lower out of stance and attack with better leverage. I can teach spatial awareness and being able to key against what offenses are doing. Like, you could teach all that, but 6'6 plus, 260 plus pounds, with vines, 34 plus inch arms on Zach Harrison, and having that type of athleticism in that body, You can't teach that. So I know Ohio State fans are ready for the breakout, and they've seen, obviously, the Bosa brothers and Chase Young and a lot of good defensive ends. Last year, they had Jonathan Cooper, who was drafted a little lower in the draft, but was still a good football player. They have 2 defensive ends this year, Tyreke Smith and Zach Harrison. Obviously, Harrison is the former 5-star, looks the parts. Everything is there from a physical perspective, but there are usually 2 kind of paths that players take, right? So like the Bosa's come into college, and they're technically refined. They have great hands. They understand, like they come from football families, obviously with, John Bosa being in the NFL, their uncle Eric Kumaro being in the NFL. Like they come from a defensive line family who has been teaching them how to use their hands and how to be these nuanced players for so long. And they come in, they're technically refined. They might not be as physically gifted as a guy like a Chase Young or a Zach Harrison, but they're ready. And then you see a guy like Chase Young who had to wait his turn, comes into his sophomore year, and like he played with Nick Bosa and he gets overshadowed a little bit, but he still has a 10-sack season. But you see, even during that year, Chase Young's not ready. Like he's not the top 5 pick he was the year after. He was like, oh wow, this guy's probably a first-round pick. You want to see improvements. And then he comes into his junior year and he's, he has rounded out the nuances of his game, and he's been turned not only a great athlete into a great football player. And I think that's the arc that we're going to get with Zach Harrison. You saw the flashes last year in an abbreviated season. I think he had like 4.5 sacks or some odd number in a very limited sample size. But he was sharing snaps with Jonathan Cooper, with Tyreke Smith, with Tyler Friday. And I think that one thing that we're going to see this year is Cooper's gone. Friday's out now with the injury. There's going to be a lot of reps to go around with a guy like Zach Harrison. And if he's able to put it together from a technical perspective, 6'6", 260, with that type of athleticism, with vines for arms, that kind of guy goes very high in the first round. And I think I gave him, I think he was like somewhere between 20 and 25 in my most recent mock. I will say this, if he improves on the nuances, the hand usage in his game, the pass rush plan, the repertoire, this kid could go top 10 because this kid has that physical profile. It is there. It's not hard to see. You don't have to be a scout. You don't have to be a great evaluator to look at that kid and say, that kid has the makings of the next great Ohio State pass rusher.
Do you think that the strength that he has, like physical strength, is he lacking in that area?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, with a guy like him, sometimes I think he might play a little bit high because he's got long levers. He's got long legs. I think there's a leverage issue at times with him. But I think he's got plenty of play strength. I think he's got plenty of lockout. I more think it's just aiming points. Like, where am I attacking on an offensive lineman? Because for the longest time, Zach Harrison has been able to attack right down a guy's chest or run right around the guy, and he didn't have to do anything. I mean, it still works for him. He still, again, was pretty productive in the limited snaps he had. But I think, when he learns how to play half-man relation, he learns to play, the shoulders and be able to push, pull, and get off of guys quickly. I think that power profile is more than adequate, and I think it's plus for a guy like Harrison. He's just a guy that, again, needs to learn how to use his body. I don't think he quite understands all the things that he's capable of yet, but I think it is going to come this year in 2021.
There's a guy in the Big Ten that the Buckeyes will not see this year on the field. I mean, I don't even think Big Ten championship game because Purdue's not going to be good. But George Karlaftis, I know you're very, very high on. Is Karlaftis right now in your top 5 of defensive end? Is he higher than Harrison?
Yeah, Karlaftis right now is right behind Thibodeau. He's second ranked defensive end. I think that there is a good conversation there between a Harrison and a Karlaftis, for instance, because Karlaftis is technically refined. He is super physical. There's a high floor with a guy like Karlaftis. Like, I don't see him being a non-contributor on the next level. He has a very safe projection to at least being a rocked up, strong defensive end, power converter, who's a better athlete than people give credit for, but then also he can move inside on third downs. A guy like Harrison,
good point.
Ceiling is much higher with a guy like Harrison, but then what's the worst that I'm getting? If he doesn't improve, then I'm not really sure what that projection is. He might be a guy that's like a Kiki Mingo from LSU a few years ago, where like it never quite clicked. The physical profile was good. He was talented for sure, but he just never really understood how to use those physical gifts and make it tangibly into a productive football player. So I think the floor is a little lower from Karlaftis, which is why I kind of prefer him right now. But if both guys hit what their presumed ceilings is, Zach Harrison is going to be a higher drafted player, and he's going to be a better football player.
It's good to hear. Really good to hear. I'm also curious to hear what you see when you look at Tyreke Smith, a guy that is not looked at in the same way as Harrison, but plays a very, very good role, important role on the team. What do you see when you look at him?
I see solid, but I wouldn't say there's anything spectacular about him.
Okay.
I think I have a 3rd round grade on him, which is, it's good. 3rd round is good, man. Like, and some people say, like, oh, only a 3rd round grade. This kid is a hair over 6'3", 255, 260 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark, has about 33-inch arms, verified measurables. And there is a solid power profile. There's a good power profile. I even say there's good. There's a good athlete. I think he's going to test relatively well. But I don't see a player that has a true calling card of how he's going to be successful. I see a player that I think is going to be a rotational player that's ultimately going to be a 5 to 7 sack contributor. Could he be a starter? I think he can be down the road. But I don't think that there's anything from an athletic perspective. We talked about those unteachables. I don't see anything special about a guy like Tyreke Smith. I see good. I see a solid get off. I see a bunch of boxes being checked. But what for the defensive end position, I urge this for anybody that likes to do film evaluation or likes to just, kind of just be casual with it. Defensive ends, more than maybe just about any position, maybe offensive tackle would be up there as well. Traits matter so much. They absolutely matter. When you talk about the best in the game, you're talking about a bunch of freak shows, a bunch of aliens. I don't think that Tyreke Smith is an alien, but I think that he's a guy that is going to check all those boxes and is going to be probably valued somewhere on day 2. Because, again, we talked about the floor versus ceiling. I think Tyreke Smith, at worst, is a very solid rotational piece with starter upside.
You mentioned something with Harrison that I'm curious to get your insight on this. I know what I think, but you're studying this from your vantage point and your eyeballs on a consistent basis. You mentioned Harrison not being one to move inside on 3rd down, more outside positioning, defensive end, normal 4-3 lineup. Do you see Smith being able to move inside on passing downs?
More than Harrison, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
One thing that's usually a big help on the inside is length, which obviously Harrison has more of than Smith. But what I think that Smith has is more natural leverage. I think that he has that ability to convert speed to power at a higher rate. I think that Harrison's more tall, lanky guy that's a true outside track rusher, can give you an inside counter from time to time, but I don't consider him a true power converter. I think that he is a guy that's going to run that track and be an athlete. For Tyreke Smith, the ability to hit that outside shoulder, but then the ability to stick his outside foot in the ground and convert speed to power, I think that that's where he wins best on the outside. And I think on the inside that also helps because he's a better athlete than any guard he's going to go against. And he has that ability to both use finesse and power to win his rusher.
Haskell Garrett, I called him the disruptor last year throughout the entire season, the way he was able to disrupt things on the field. NFL draft-wise, what do you see?
I mean, first and foremost, man, the story is fantastic. After the tragedy that happened before the season, obviously with the bullet wounds and the ability for him to just come back so quickly. And for a guy that had been waiting his turn, had never been a guy, sitting behind Devon Hamilton and Tommy Togiai and all those interior defensive linemen. It had been for him, he hadn't played much, and he finally gets this opportunity seemingly. And then it looks like his season is going to be taken from him. And then he comes back. And it's a great story, first and foremost. And I think that the NFL is going to value Haskell very highly. I have, kind of like Tyreke Smith, a similar range. I have a 3rd round grade on to Haskell Garrett. And I think that the positives that Haskell has is, former 5-star from Bishop Gorman. There is a really fantastic first step here. Like, he puts interior defense, offensive linemen in some bad positions early. Mm-hmm. And then he is a plus athlete. He has some nice explosiveness. He has some nice quickness. He is your traditional 4-3 tech that is, you want him to shoot gaps and you want him to be a penetrating force. That's what he is. The problems is one, he only has 1 year of production. People are going to knock him. If he has another nice year and a full season, then people are going to say okay, now we're going to buy in a little more. You only saw a few games out of him, again, with the abbreviated season. So people are going to say, I need to see more. I need to see more, which is understandable. You're betting, you're investing millions of dollars into this person. So I get it. You want to make sure that your player that you're seeing in flashes is the player that you're going to get on a more consistent basis. And then the other big issue is he doesn't have a ton of length to him. He's right around 6'2". He's got about 32-inch arms, and you see it come up in the run game at times. There are some times where, like, even when he's trying to, like we're saying, he's fighting, front side against outside zone, and he's attacking the outside shoulder. There's just sometimes where he gets reached a little too easy because he just doesn't have that outside length to really power and fight pressure and be able to win against longer offensive linemen. And that's a problem at times. And I think that does affect his ability in the run game. This is a guy that for some systems that are going to ask a guy to be a little stouter at the point of attack, are going to ask guys to control blockers and not just, defeat them with quickness, it's going to limit him at times. So I think that his run game is not nearly as projectable right now as he is in the passing game. But at the end of the day, this is a passing league. So if you told me ultimately that Haskell Garrett goes in the second round, I would believe you, because I think that the penetration ability that he has does really play well into what the NFL values today. I just don't think that there's a incredibly well-rounded player. We haven't seen him enough. And I don't know if the physical traits, especially from the length perspective, is such that he's going to develop into anything more than a solid run game contributor. I don't think he's ever going to be plus in that department.
Is it safe to say that the only way for Haskell Garrett to go in the first round is for him to have an Dominican Sue or a Warren Sapp type of final year in college football?
I mean, it's got to be huge. It's got to be huge.
Yeah.
I think he's going to test, relatively well. And I think just having the full season is going to help a ton. And the other good thing that he does have going for him is outside of DeMarvin Leal, the interior defensive lineman, pass rusher from Texas A&M, it's kind of a down interior defensive line group so far. The edge group is fantastic. Interior defensive line, just waiting for that guy. Ultimately, I don't know if Haskell quite has the upside to being in the first round conversation, but I think that, there's going to be some tough decisions, because if a team is really desperate at interior defensive line late in the first round, and there's just not a guy that had a better season, or just it doesn't have a high of a floor as a guy like Haskell, maybe they talk themselves into it. I don't think it's going to happen, but I do think that to answer your question, he does need like just a stupid final year, like 10 sacks, All-American type season.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he's going to look great on the hoof. Like, guys are going to get him into the workouts, are going to look at his body. I don't think he's going to really show off in that area, but I do think he's going to test relatively well. So I think it really needs to be kind of the all-around effort for him to be that type of a riser. But I do think that there's a safe projection for him on day 2 for sure.
So it's a last thought for any player here with Garrett. I wonder, and I don't know, because I don't watch the film the same way you do. You're evaluating for draft stuff. I'm evaluating your play on the field for just that game specifically. I don't know how much Garrett's play was impacted and improved because Togiai was next to him. I don't know if that was Garrett helping Togiai, Garrett was doing it because it's Garrett, or Tommy Togiai was just like doing it because that's who he is. I don't know how they play off of each other. So I'm curious, because Ohio State's planning on having a new nose tackle this year. I think his name's Teron Vincent, who's actually looked very well in the offseason, but he didn't play very much last year, especially next to Haskell Garrett. So I'm curious how Garrett goes when the running mate last year, who he played next to, they were a dynamic duo that was really hard to stop.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that he does have going for him is, like you mentioned, Teron Vincent. He was a former 4- or 5-star recruit, right? They got Antoine Jackson. I think they got Jerron Cage still coming back as well. So, like, there are some guys that are notable players. They just haven't played a ton, kind of like true. Haskell Garrett hadn't played a ton. But to answer your question, Tommy Togiai definitely helps him, because Tommy Togiai was like that leverage monster who take up multiple blockers. Haskell Garrett was getting a lot of one-on-one opportunities because they knew who Tommy was, especially early in the season. They didn't know who Haskell Garrett was. Like, they may have known, like, the recruiting profile and all that type of stuff, but, like, they hadn't seen him on the field. It wasn't tangible yet. So I think Tommy definitely does help. But I think guys like Jackson and Cage and all these dudes, Teron Vincent, like you mentioned, like, I think a lot of those guys are still going to end up being good football players and take some of the attention off. But I think that it's going to be a struggle maybe earlier in the season, just because now the target is firmly on Haskell Garrett's back. That's the guy that they're going to want to double team. That's the guy that they're going to want to just, they want to eliminate the impact that he has. So I think that might hurt him early in the season, but you need one of those young and unproven defensive tackles to step up. If that happens, then I think that we're going to see the impact that Garrett had in a smaller sample size this year.
Ryan Roberts, this has been fun getting to reconnect with you once again, talking about draft picks, draft projections. Got 3D linemen here. Hopefully, the plan is to get Ryan back on down the road before the season starts, before game week, to talk about another position group. You can kind of expect it. One has a whole bunch of holes for Ohio State. There's 2 more left. The other one on defense has a couple guys that have played a little bit. We're going to talk about those down the road. Ryan, if you could, let everyone know where they can connect with you on Twitter and also where they can check out your website as well.
Yeah, keeping it really simple for everyone here. Rise and Draft is the Twitter handle. If you're watching YouTube, you kind of see it right below me. RiseandDraft.com is the website. So if you just remember Rise and Draft, you can find me either way. But again, Jay, I know, this is always fun, man. I really appreciate it. I don't even know how many times I've been on at this point, brother, but I really appreciate you constantly having me on, the support that you always give me, man. I really do appreciate it so much.
Yes, sir, Ryan. I appreciate it as well. Guys, you can follow me on Twitter at JStevens07. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, as we're going to wrap up the week, do some more fall camp talk, a little Quinn Ewers talk. He's reporting to camp this week, so I know everybody's excited to see how he looks on the field. I have my own personal opinions, but I'm going to relay what we hear from camp once he gets there later in the week.